The subject is Paul McCartney. The theme is symbolism. The thesis is death. The proposition, coincidence.
Hey everybody, Jay Weidner, Reality Check. Thanks for watching. Hit like and subscribe and all that stuff. I'm going to get right to it today because I got a guest I've been wanting to have on for a while because what he did in his work is he kind of pulled the string and unraveled the whole sweater of pop culture, really, at the very origins of modern pop culture. So his name is Mike Williams. He's the Sage of Quay, and you can find him at sageofquay.com. And he's got a really good YouTube channel, which I will link to. So you guys got to check him out. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing well, Jay. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. So I'm just going to let you have the floor because I don't really have anything to add that I haven't already said. I'm not, I did not investigate this. I really am kind of to pop film what you are to pop music. I more deconstruct film than I do anything else. But let's just start at the beginning of the famous, incredible band that had two songwriters that were just unbelievable, especially for their age, and they're called the Beatles. And tell us, give us your Beatles narrative.
Well, I should probably start by saying that I was a total Beatle fanatic growing up. And at age of 9, I begged my father to take me to the movie theater to go see Yellow Submarine. And my father took my brother and I. My brother's only about 15 months younger than I am. And, I was just a kid and I wasn't expecting an animation. So I remember being disappointed until the very end when the Beatles came out.
Right.
So it was because of the Beatles that I got into music and I started writing my own songs and recording and doing all that stuff. And as far as writing music and the such, I've been doing that since the late 1970s, we'll say 1978, 79 or so. And so I was a total Beatle freak for my entire life until I hit 2016, 7 years ago. And it was back then that I ran across the book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears. And I have the 2022 version here. You can see it's...
I've read it. Wow, yours is really...
tabbed.
Wow.
So when I read the book, that was the red covered book at the time. It was released on September 9th of 2009. So that's the triple nines, or if you invert the nines, you get the sixes.
Yeah.
And when I read the book, it was a shock. It blew me away. And I didn't really know what to make of it at the time. And so what I did was, I was asked to come on a show with Sophia Smallstorm. I told her about the book. And she says, "Oh, you need to come on the show and talk about it." And I really didn't want to because I wasn't sure whether this was something that I really wanted to hop into. And the other thing is I really didn't want to be the Paul is dead guy. I figured, okay, this is one of these things I'm going to read about, and then it's, I'll move on to other stuff. Well, to make a long story short, that didn't happen. So I did the show back in September of 2016. And I talked about the book, and I had to pull a bunch of slides together. And it was a daunting task, Jay, because as you know, the book is 666 pages. So when somebody comes on, or somebody wants you to come on and talk about the book, your immediate reaction is, well, how am I going to boil down that much, and make sense out of it? But one thing led to another, and the book just intrigued me because I was such a Beatles fanatic that I started digging into the claims that the book was making. And as I was digging in and researching, what happened was I found that my research was telling me that the book was truthful. There are threads of fiction in the book. It is categorized as historical fiction. And I should say that up front. And the reason why that's done is because the main protagonist, who is Billy Shears, who tells us in the book that his name is William Shepherd or Billy Shepherd, he cannot talk about the truth. He cannot come out with a nonfiction book because he is bound by non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, and secrecy agreements. And if he goes down that path, then he runs the risk of jeopardizing everything that he's worked on and worked for over the last 56 years or so.
Yep.
So that's it. So I just started digging into the book, and over time, what happened was other people were watching my shows, and they got pulled into the research. And over the years, I have about a handful of researchers that I correspond with, that I'm networked into, that are very, very good, very diligent, and they dot the I's and cross the T's. And so we have been working together on and off over the last 7 years or so, putting content out. Most of the content that I put out is mine, but those folks have contributed, and where they have, I will note and give them credit for, their piece of what it is that I presented. Other times, I just had them come on the show and to present their own material, their own thoughts and ideas. So the book tells us that, to net it out, that the Beatles were not organic, that they were a construct of Tavistock, as was the Rolling Stones. And they were created as a social engineering initiative to change the very fabric of our society and our culture. And the reason why that was done was because there is an ideology, a mindset that permeates the pyramid of power, the controllers, that goes back to Aleister Crowley. And I guess we could talk about that a little bit later too, where humanity is shackled and oppressed by the current governance that's in place. They would refer to it as the Age of Osiris. Others might refer to it as the Piscean Age, and so on. But humans are restricted, and we're not in a position to be enlightened or, quote, illuminated. So the pyramid of power, through the Committee of 300, through Tavistock, created the Beatles, created the Rolling Stones, created the entire British invasion, if you will, to start tearing down the traditional constructs that everybody was operating within, which would be your traditional values. It would be institutionalized religion, specifically Christianity. In Memoirs, it tells us that the Illuminati declared war on Christianity on September 11th of 1962. And that's about the time that the Beatles emerged. Their first album, Please Please Me, their first UK release. Their official albums, by the way, folks, are their UK releases, not the Capitol releases out of the US, was released on March 22nd of 1963. And there you have the 322, which is the Skull and Bones number and all that stuff. The Beatles as an entity are completely immersed in occultism. And it doesn't mean the Beatles themselves necessarily were, although I would make an argument that they were well aware of, at least to some degree, what it is they were involved in.
Yep.
And so if we take a look at where we are today, and if we use 1960 as a stake in the ground, it's just a nice round number, and we fast forward 60 years, we can see that the change that has taken place in society across the world has been a tremendous transformation. It's very, very different from 60 years ago. And I'm at an age now, I'm 64 years old, so I can go back in time and I have a benchmark. I have a point of reference where I can take a look and say, well, I was here 60 years ago or 50 years ago, and I'm here today. Were the changes significant? I would say the changes were very, very significant within our society and our culture. So the book takes you down that path. And of course, it tells us that biological Paul McCartney, James Paul McCartney, passed away, died September 11th of 1966. And Billy replaced him. And Billy is the primary replacement. He says in Memoirs that there have been others that have played the role. In fact, in Memoirs, he tells us that there was another playing the part of Paul McCartney that had a hit, but he doesn't say whether that person's hit was during the Beatle era or the solo period. So it takes us down this road where Paul McCartney was swapped out, replaced, and we have been looking at and listening to Billy Shears for 56 years. And to put it into context, Paul McCartney was there from, let's say, 1962 through 1966. We're talking roughly 3.5 to 4 years. Billy's been there for 56 years.
Yep.
So what most people know is the guy that's playing the role, because it is a role. Paul McCartney is a role that Billy plays.
Yeah, and you would not be able to make a switch like that without upper high level machinations. I mean, that's just
right.
You just couldn't. Bank accounts, property, there would just be so many problems. And he doesn't look like him anyway. I was a portrait photographer for years, and the minute I saw the two pictures together, it's like that. It doesn't look like the same guy.
Yeah, when you lay up the images, see what they've done over time, what Tavistock did was to create a composite.
Yes, thank you.
That's what they did.
I thought I was losing my mind.
No, they established, that was intentional, to establish a composite identity of what Paul McCartney looked like. So if you pick 1964 and take a look at him, he does not look like the guy from 1973, 74 during the Wings period.
No.
But when you don't lay the pictures against each other and lay them out in a collage, people just focus on what they're looking at right now. So if they say, well, that's Paul McCartney, that's an image of him, and there's no comparison, then people just accept that that's Paul McCartney. Otherwise, well, who else would it be? Right. That's how they did it with the Beatles. When they came out with Sgt. Pepper, which was Billy's album, it was his baby. He really put it together, him and George Martin. That's why they changed the look of all of the Beatles, because if they just had Billy there as Paul, people would say, well, gee, that doesn't look like Paul McCartney. Something's changed. So when they changed everything, the hair, the beards, the costumes and all that stuff, then what happened was it took the attention away from him as a person individually. And now it's a concept where the entire band has moved on to bigger and better things, which, of course, Sgt. Pepper kicked off the psychedelic era. Yep. But they don't look alike. One of the researchers that I'm connected into, Sally, made an astonishing discovery going back a number of months ago. She had been talking about it and presenting it on a private group that we have. And she said he has a prosthetic right eye. Billy's right eye, it's a fake eye. And I remember when she first started showing me the images, I was looking at them and I was thinking, okay. And the more evidence that she put forward, then I said, you know what, she's absolutely right. We did a show on that. So even though Billy is taller by inches, he has a longer jawline, his face is longer. He has detached earlobes.
Yep.
I mean, there's a whole slew of differences. The biggest difference today is the fact that Billy has an artificial eye. His right eye is a fake eye, and Paul McCartney obviously had two good eyes. And we have shown in our presentations evidence that Billy's eye, his right eye, is artificial.
And what would be the point, just to make him look more like Paul?
As far as the eye?
Yeah.
I think the eye was, if I had to guess, and it is a guess, there's really two ways to go about this. One is he lost the eye somehow through an accident, or two, it was part of a ritual. Billy is deeply embedded in the occult, into mysticism, into the esoteric. And if you read Memoirs, he talks a lot about this, and he also talks about his affinity for Aleister Crowley, which we suspect it's possible might be his father, his biological father, through ritual sex magic. With sex magic, a child that is conceived through that ritual is earmarked for bigger and better things down the road. So they are positioned, they are groomed and handled through their life to be in prominent positions as they get older. So my suspicion is, and again, folks, I don't know for sure, is that his eye was probably part of a ritual. He does say in Memoirs that his trauma-based programming started. His recall goes back to the age of 3. He said he was tutored and mentored by Aleister Crowley for 10 years. So Billy was born in 1937. Crowley died in 1947. There's the 10 years. And so there was this whole process of grooming and handling him, and if he was conceived by Crowley during sex magic, which is something that he is known for, that was his thing. Then when he was born, he was tapped to move on to big things in his life, to be very influential in a very powerful position. And and what he's done with the Beatles, I would argue is pretty significant.
I would say he brought a lot to the table. I'm not a musician, but you can hear the sound change with the Beatles as soon as he joined.
Yes.
And even with, what's that song? Madonna, Lady Madonna.
Lady Madonna, yeah.
That to me sounds like they put that out as a single. And in my point of view, that's Billy doing his best impression of Paul, so that we got used to the kind of because there is a switch, but so he played that song, and they put it out as a single just to get us ready for the switcheroo. And let me ask you, what, both George and John had violent acts happen to them. And what do you think that was about?
Well, Memoirs tells us, going back to October of 1962, was it? 1962, that John and Paul entered into a Faustian bargain, a pact, a deal with the devil. Now, some folks, they don't want to embrace that. They don't want to believe it, but I'm just explaining what the book tells us. And when they entered into that pact, let's say it did happen, then the argument would be that Paul's death was a result of entering into that Faustian bargain. So he would have the fame, he would have a legendary name. It would live on forever, right?
Right.
And he would be part of one of the most famous, if not the most famous, pop music songwriting teams of all time. And when you're 21, 22 years old, that sounds great.
Yep.
And so the book says that they entered into this pact, and of course both of them were at an age where, in all likelihood, they really didn't understand what it is that they were doing, what they were entering into, or the consequences of what it is that they did. And so that would lead into Paul's death in 1966. John, of course, died in 1980 when he was 40. Yeah. And George had that attack at his estate, and he almost died. And in the book, it's called, Billy refers to it as an overkill based upon that Faustian bargain that they entered into. So I'm not going to claim to understand the purpose of taking it beyond biological Paul McCartney and then taking out John Lennon and then trying to take out George Harrison, but that's how it's explained in the book. But these Faustian bargains, what Memoirs tells us is, Billy calls it death for success. And so if we look at many of the bands going back in the day, and it still goes on today, but if we take a look at the Rolling Stones, we had Brian Jones. Yeah. We have Keith Moon of The Who. We have John Bonham of Led Zeppelin.
That's right.
And we can pick other bands, and it goes on and on and on. So, a lot of people have a hard time getting their heads wrapped around that these pacts, these Faustian bargains actually exist and that they're actually conducted. But based upon my research, Jay, they're real.
They're real.
They do take place. Yeah,
they're real, and we know that Aleister Crowley let in a demon or an alien. He worked really hard to do it, and it supposedly manifested, and then Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were trying to do the same thing in the Mojave Desert in the 50s, and they openly said that they were trying to create a moonchild that was going to create chaos And then we have what I think is one of the most telling parts of Billy's Back, or the Memoirs book, is when he asked Brian Epstein what the point of the Beatles was, and Brian replied, "To destroy religion."
Yeah.
And that would be the goal of Aleister Crowley.
Yeah. So that's because, as I mentioned when we started talking, that Crowley looked at the current age, the Piscean age, the age of Osiris, as a patriarchal system that was oppressive. And he really wanted nothing to do with institutionalized religion or the current construct. It goes back to concepts that were put forth by Theodor Adorno, where Adorno said that the whole system is a fascist system, and people are programmed to operate within a system. So at work, they are producers. At home, they are consumers. And I notice there's a lot of people that will not put Theodor Adorno in a high esteem, but there's a lot of concepts that Adorno spoke about and he presented that, at least from the perspective of philosophically and ideologically, with regard to freeing the human spirit, made sense. It goes back to the human potential movement of the 1960s, of which Willis Harman was part of too. And Willis Harman, who was with Stanford Research Institute, he and Adorno, there's no doubt in my mind, because, it's a small club and we're not in it, but, they all knew each other and they were all working together.
Sure.
And
the Frankfurt
Adorno
School.
was very instrumental in that philosophy, as well as, I believe, with oversight with regard to the Beatles and their music.
I completely agree. And I believe actually he wrote Imagine for John Lennon. I've read his poems and read his writings, and clearly he wrote that song. That is his philosophy completely. And it comes out of the Frankfurt School. A bunch of intellectuals in the 60s came out of that school, and their whole purpose was to rearrange and change culture. I was even influenced by it. One of my favorite writers when I was young, film student, was Krakauer, who was I didn't even know at the time what Frankfurt School was. Yet he was having this huge influence on me as a filmmaker. And now I realize, oh my God, what was I doing? Right. And we didn't know it. But I think Adorno is right in there. I think he was directing the music. I don't think he wrote it all, but I think he directed it. And the purpose is one of the things that these people believe is that you either have a perfect society, or if you don't have a perfect society, your society is screwed up, which everyone is, then you have to create as much chaos within that society so that society crumbles, and then you can reform everything after it crumbles. And we're clearly seeing it crumbling all around us at a record pace. And it all really did start in the 60s. That's what's really interesting, because it also, in the film industry, it started in the 60s. Right in the early 60s, you began seeing things in films that you didn't see before, and an attitude too. Yeah. And of course, that traveled right into the Laurel Canyon psyop, where, all these filmmakers like Roger Corman and were doing all sorts of things. Another whole story. So let's get back to the Beatles. So they're trying to tell us that the Beatles wrote 237 songs in 8 years?
7 years, yeah.
7 years.
Yeah.
I'm not a songwriter, but that just seems like really way out.
Yeah, so I peg it at around 200 songs, but there's an argument and debate over how many songs, because there are songs that were not published and so on. But I use a number of 200. So yeah, so we're told that the Beatles wrote 200 songs or so, a little bit more, over a 7-year period of time. And so back in 2020, I actually released a documentary, a 4.5 hour presentation, where I looked into, did the Beatles write all their own music? And the elephant in the room for me, which told me that they did not, is a DVD I watched back in 2019, and the DVD is titled Deconstructing Rubber Soul. And it's the official narrative that's being told as to how Rubber Soul was recorded. So they tell us that the Beatles recorded 16 songs, 14 for the album, and 2 singles, plus a Christmas flexi disc within 30 days. So they entered the studio on October 11th of 1965, and they wrapped everything up on November 11th of 1965. So being a musician myself, a songwriter, as soon as I heard that story, especially given the backdrop, I should say this, the official narrative tells us that the Beatles came into the Rubber Soul sessions with essentially no backlog of material. They had really no songs written, so they had to write from scratch. So as I'm watching the DVD, and I've got this background of 16 songs starting from scratch, I said, there's no way. There's just no way that could happen. So, I started digging and I looked into it. And the result is that I concluded that it was not possible. In fact, what really happened was all of the songs were pre-written and pre-recorded, recorded by session players. And for folks who want to understand how the session musicians work, I recommend a couple of DVDs. Watch The Wrecking Crew. That will clearly explain how the 1960s and 1970s music industry worked, along with the DVD titled Muscle Shoals, because they were doing the same thing in Alabama as the Wrecking Crew was doing on the West Coast and also on the East Coast, but more so on the West Coast. And then watch the DVD, the documentary Hired Gun, which explains how the music industry operates from, let's say, 1980 going forward, where session players are still the mainstay of the recordings that you're listening to. So the Beatles had all of the music written, basically backing tracks were done. And by the time they got into the studio on October 11th of 1965, their task was to sing the vocals. Yep. That's it, to get the vocal tracks down. They had 30 days to do that. And it was a struggle because they had to learn the songs and they were taught the songs and they did their thing. John Lennon had said at one time, I think it was in the Rolling Stone magazine, going back to the early 1970s, that the Beatles were craftsmen, which meant they were very good at their craft, what they were trained to do. And they were trained by Tavistock to be able to pull things like that together very quickly. That was their training. So they laid the vocals down. And what George Martin did after the vocals were done was he married the instrumental tracks, which were already pre-recorded by the time the Beatles got into the studio with their completed vocals. And then they were able to release the album. But there were a lot of problems with Rubber Soul. As an example, you don't know the names of the songs because we're told that they didn't have a backlog, so they're writing the songs on the spot. Well, if you don't know the names of the songs, then you're not able yet to do any of the printing process. You can't print the record labels that go on the 33 RPM records or the 45s. You can't print the record sleeves because on the back of the Rubber Soul record sleeve is the name of the songs. So you can't do any of that stuff until you know what the songs are. And you also have to know the time of the songs, because without the timing of each song, then you cannot do the sequencing. This is all stuff that's very important to get a record out. So if the Beatles were actually writing, recording, and doing everything that the official story tells us, there was no time from the point when the lacquer, the final mono lacquer was cut on November 17th, to get that record signed, sealed, and delivered in stores, in retail on December 3rd of 1965 in time for the Christmas season. No time. And so what I concluded was, okay, well, then the only way it could have been done was all that other stuff, the record sleeve, the labels, the names of the songs, the times of the songs, the sequencing and all that. It had to be done. And when they came in and sang the vocals, George Martin wrapped up real quick, and they got the initial batch of Rubber Soul out into retail. That's how it worked. And then I concluded that if they did it for Rubber Soul, they did it for everything. That was the model. That was the model. And again, folks, watch The Wrecking Crew, watch Muscle Shoals, and watch Hired Gun. Watch those DVDs, and what I'm telling you here will make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Or you can watch my presentation.
Yeah. Watch your presentation. It's really good. The 4-hour one is riveting. Lots of intricate details. Yeah, The Wrecking Crew is a great film.
Yeah.
About like 6 or 7 guys in LA, and they played on every album, essentially.
Yeah.
And I believe it was on your site. I saw the Mickey, what was it, Davy Jones interview,
Davy Jones,
where he says, we're not the first whatever it was, contrived band.
He said the Beatles were the first manufactured band.
They were.
In the interview. Davy just blurted it out. Yeah. So also, I should also mention that Bernard Purdie, the famous session drummer who drummed for Aretha Franklin for 25 years, back in the late 70s, I believe it was 1978, Bernard came out and said that he drummed on 21 Beatles songs. And he caught a lot of heat for that. But Bernard, in 45 years, has never come off that statement. He said that he was hired by Brian Epstein to drum and fix the drum tracks on 21 Beatles songs. And this is what he did. I think Bernard is probably one of the most recorded drummers in the history of drumming. And we also had George Martin tell us, as part of the official narrative, that he hired Andy White to drum on P.S. I Love You and Love Me Do. And my argument is that I don't think George Martin hired Andy White just to drum on those 2 songs. I really don't. I think George Martin hired him to drum on most of the first album, Please Please Me. And then
Bernard was a different drummer on that album.
Yeah.
Almost like a jazz drummer.
Yeah. The drumming styles on the early stuff was beyond the skill level of Ringo Starr. It was beyond the skill level of a Pete Best. Also, after I released my big presentation back in April of 2020, I was having some dialogue with a lady, and I can tell, sometimes when you get emails, you can tell when somebody's corresponding with you that they know a lot more than what it is that they're letting on.
Yep.
And so once I released the presentation, she wrote me and she said, "Hey, Mike, now that the cat is out of the bag, let me just tell you that she's related to Ronnie Verrill. Ronnie's passed, but Ronnie Verrill was another great session musician out of the UK, and he drummed on many, many records. In fact, he was the drummer on the Muppets animal sequence, the Muppet that would drum, that was Ronnie Verrill. But Ronnie drummed on many, many recordings. And she told me that Ronnie also drummed on Beatle tracks. And Bernard Purdie, in a 2004 interview, it was a Red Bull interview, he said that there were 4 drummers on the Beatles songs. And I believe Bernard was talking about the early period, 62 through 66. And he said that Ringo was not one of them. And then the question I get asked is, well, who were the 4 drummers? And I said, well, we know it was Andy White because the official narrative tells us Andy drummed. Bernard's been telling us he drummed on 21 songs for 45 years. And, my contact, my source said that their relative, Ronnie Verrill, drummed on Beatle tracks. And if I had to guess, it could very well be Hal Blaine as the 4th drummer, who was one of the drummers for the Wrecking Crew. From 1967 through 1970, the Beatles themselves wrote more of their own material and played more on the recorded tracks. But even during that period, the Billy period, the Beatles were still using session players and ghostwriters to fill out the content for the albums and the singles.
And really, why would you not do it that way?
Right. That's right.
You wouldn't take a chance. I worked in the corporate world for decades.
Me too.
No way. everything is pre-planned and pre-done. They just don't do it any other way. And
it's cycle time, Jay, right? You and I know this. It's cycle time.
Yeah.
So a producer is not going to waste their time with musicians that don't cut it, right? The skill level's not there. So producers, think of them as a manager, a director of the project or the initiative, and that project or initiative is an album. They're going to bring in people that they know can get the job done.
Absolutely.
Period. They're not going to waste time trying to teach somebody how to play this chord or, take 50 takes on a lead guitar part in a song. They're going to bring in the very best, and they're going to get these songs done. That's how it works.
Yeah, and you tell the story that Brian gave a tape to who's the manager? I mean, who's the producer?
George Martin.
Yeah, to George Martin, and he rejected them.
Yes.
And then he was kind of forced to take them on by something or some force. And I'll tell you about it. A month ago, I was listening on Sirius to the Billy Joel channel, and he was talking about the last part of Abbey Road, right? That whole string of little short songs that are put together.
Yeah.
Right? And he was talking about how that influenced his songwriting. And at one point, right in the middle of talking about it, he just stops, and out of the blue, he goes, and you cannot believe what a great musician George Martin was. Whoa, did he just tell us?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I have a clip of George Martin in an interview saying that he wrote the lead for Michelle.
Yeah.
Right? Billy tells a story that he was dabbling on the guitar and as Paul McCartney in some cafe, and he was, just coming up with something that resembled Michelle. But then you have George Martin say, yeah, I wrote the lead in Michelle. I believe George Martin was, well, not even going to say I believe, I know George Martin was instrumental. He is the glue that kept it all together. Not only was he the managing director of the psychological operation known as the Beatles and Beatlemania, but he also was, I think he was writing music. He obviously was arranging, and it's possible that Adorno was also writing some of the songs. I don't subscribe to Adorno writing all of the music, which is a claim that you'll hear sometimes, because Adorno had a lot of other stuff going on. And but I believe the way it worked is Tavistock/EMI had a staff, a small staff of writers, maybe 5 to 6, that were turning out the songs, and it was George Martin and or Theodore Adorno working together, deciding which songs were going to go on the albums and which ones were not.
Yep, absolutely the way it would function in any corporate world. So you can argue with you all you want, but I was a producer for a long time, and we would never take a chance.
No,
you get fired. So yeah, so so Billy comes in, and he's clearly a better musician than the rest of them, and the whole sound changes, and they were probably given orders to create the psychedelic era,
right?
And for mind control reasons, I would guess, and spiritual reasons, I would think, and on an occult level, these forces are let in through the dimensional barriers. The barriers are broken, and these entities get in, and they flood in, and they're evidenced by mental illness. Is basically how you identify these entities. And we certainly have a rash of mental illness going on these days. And also John was John, there's this article, you sent it to me, I'd seen it years ago, about John, his personal servant or something, saying that John had turned into a right-winger.
Yeah, Fred Seaman. Yeah, Fred Seaman was his personal assistant for 2 years. Yeah.
And that would be, honestly, a lot of people change when they're near 40, when they lose their liberalism and they go conservative, basically when they get some money and they realize how much they're getting taxed. And I'm sure he was getting taxed. And that surprised me when I first read it, but now it makes a lot of sense. He may He may have crossed a barrier there too if he started talking about other stuff that he knew about.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know, what if what Fred said was true or not, but like you said, Jay, as you get older, and he had Sean at the time, so it was during this period of time when he was on a hiatus, right? That 5-year period of time, you start to see things maybe a little differently than you did when you were much younger. So it's possible that, I mean, I don't know if he was like, he flipped the switch to be a conservative, but he probably had more conservative leanings than he had previously. I mean,
Yeah.
that I could see,
And also, he's probably, waking up in the middle of the night going, oh my God, that incident, that was all contrived to get us to go do this or to do that or whatever. And, you're slowly putting the pieces together of your own experiences and realizing how everything was being pushed. And John Lennon was a bit rebellious. He probably didn't like that.
Well, in the footnotes in Memoirs, it does tell us that John really didn't understand the full scope of what it is that he was involved in. And then when Paul died, biological Paul died, that's when he started to realize that, what, this is a lot deeper than I think that maybe I bargained for.
Yeah.
And so Yoko was his handler. This is what's told to us in the book. And Billy said that he was also a handler, not the primary handler. Yoko was the primary handler, but between Yoko and Billy, they were there to try to contain John because they said that he was a bit of a loose cannon after the point where Paul was taken out. And the book tells us, well, the narrative tells us, the prevailing narrative of the conspiracy says that he died in a car crash. But then in the footnotes of the current version of Memoirs, I think going back to last year, it starts to allude to the fact that it was a ritual sacrifice, that perhaps it wasn't a car accident involved at all, that he was just taken out on very early in the morning on September 11th, 1966, as part of a ritual sacrifice.
I just want to get this straight. Are you saying that there's other editions of Memoirs?
Yeah. So we have the 2009 version, and then in 2018, the 9 after 909 version was released. And that was the first version that had the footnotes. The first edition didn't have footnotes. And I correspond with Tom Harriet once in a while. Tom is the author or the encoder of the book. And what I gathered was Billy wanted things to move along a little quicker. And so to do that, the narrative of the book, because it is categorized as historical fiction, they wanted to put these footnotes in place to basically put more spice into it, more boldness into the statements as to what was really going on. And then there was a release of the book, updated again in 2021, and then 2022. Now, the 2021 and 2022 version have more information in it. But if you have the 2018 version, the 9 after 909 version, it's pretty much there. But some additional information has been added, especially with regard to the footnotes. So yeah, there's been multiple updates.
Okay, so tell us, why did Billy write the books? It's clearly got his picture on it, and clearly he wrote it, or parts of it.
Because nobody knows who he is, right? So there's a chapter 65 in the book is titled, let me see, I've got it right here, Know the Difference. So in that chapter, it's the second to last chapter, he tells us that everybody knows me as this person that I'm playing the role of, who passed away 56 years ago. That's not me. Everybody thinks the guy that passed away wrote all these songs. That's not him. That was me. So before he heads out, because his runway is getting shorter, he's 86 years old. He was born in 1937. We suspect his birthday is either September 9th or September 11th. That he wants people to know who he is. He wants to go out, not as so much as Paul McCartney, the persona, the public persona, but he wants more and more people to know who he is as a person, who he really is. But it's a tough nut to crack, because after 56 years of deception, it's going to be a little difficult to get any number of people, forget about a critical mass, to really latch on to the whole story.
Yeah, and I'm not really interested in how many people believe it. I'm more interested in what it reveals about what they're doing and how it works. So I wanted to ask you, just kind of a side question. What do you think of Dylan?
Well, back in the early 2000s, he was on 60 Minutes with Ed Bradley. And in that interview, he said he made a deal with the chief commander. And then Ed Bradley asked him, well, chief commander, who's that? And so Dylan was saying, well, he's the chief commander in this world and the next world. I'm paraphrasing.
That runs this world and the other world, or something.
Right, like right. And so it's interesting because in that interview, Ed Bradley asked him if he can write these songs today. And Dylan says, no, I can't do that anymore. And basically saying there was a time and a place, there was a moment when I was able to do this stuff. Also, there's a documentary, I forgot the name of it, that's on Amazon. It's a couple of hours long, where people who knew Dylan said that originally when he was playing these local clubs in the early 1960s and so on, he wasn't a great guitar player. He couldn't play harmonica. And then they said they believe he went off to the Crossroads, which is the Faustian bargain. And he comes back and he's writing all these lyrics. He's got all these songs. He could play the harmonica. And so, it's another one of these examples you could put out there and say, well, this guy went from not having all of this talent and skill to all of a sudden he's this prolific, very deep, insightful, introspective songwriter. How did that happen? But in the Rolling Stone magazine I mentioned earlier in the 1970s, I believe it was Rolling Stone. If not, it might have been the Playboy interview in 1980, but I think it was Rolling Stone. Lennon called Dylan a myth.
Yep.
He said the Beatles myth, the Dylan myth, so the McCartney myth. So, I mean, John was kind of on a roll at one point where he was just pointing it out that this stuff is not real.
Yeah, he was.
It's illusionary.
Yeah, it is curious. Dylan did complain in one interview, like around 1975. He said, my muse left me a few years ago. And clearly he had studio musicians with him, playing behind him, and he even admits it. So it's not even and also, I don't know, there's something about his singing, especially with Nashville Skyline. There's some like weird change that happened right there. They say he got in a motorcycle accident.
Right.
Yeah. But something happened at that time period, 68, 69 with him. And I don't know what it was, but I'm not even sure that the guy playing Dylan is Dylan anymore.
Well, that's another conspiracy, that Bob Dylan was swapped out too about that time. And, but that's not something I have looked at in any great detail. So yeah. So
I just
the whole McCartney thing has been enough for me.
I was sucker punched by Dylan, thought he was God on earth for a while, and now.
Yeah, well, that's it, right? They're put out there as the gods. That's where you focus your energy, both your spiritual.
Also, if you look at the lyrics of "Times They Are a Changing," they're pretty revealing, actually.
Yeah.
The curse is cast. The curse is cast against who? I mean, what do you mean the curse is cast, right? And it's very strange, as if he's actually telling us quite a bit about what he's learned about, the plan.
Right.
The same thing with Leonard Cohen, with First We Take Manhattan and The Future. And I mean, he's like letting out a lot of stuff in those songs if you know your stuff,
Well, this is what they do. I know you know this as well as anybody. They put it out there, and it's up for each individual to decode it and understand what it is that they're really saying. And
have you seen the pictures of Leonard Cohen in the university mind control?
No.
Oh yeah, type it in, Google it. Leonard Cohen, when he was like 9 years old, was taken to I forget which university where the CIA was doing all their mind control experiments in Canada, in Montreal, and he has told his girlfriend, she put it on her blog, that he had been mind controlled by the CIA when he was a young man.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. It really doesn't. You mentioned Laurel Canyon earlier.
Yep.
The military intelligence they've got their they got their stink all over Laurel Canyon.
Yeah, there was a 1938 article in the LA Times about a labyrinth tunnel system under Laurel Canyon that they discovered. And then all the houses got strategically built. I used to live in that area, and like Merv Griffin took this place. Oh, that was just one of the openings are. And there was even a tunnel between Jack Nicholson's house and Marlon Brando's house.
Is that right?
Yeah, Marlon Brando died and Jack got the house. And then he burned it down. He made a deal with the LA Fire Department to do a test burn. So they burned down Marlon Brando's house, and then the tunnel caved in during the, putting the water all over the fire caused the tunnels cave in. They saw the tunnel went all the way to Jack Nicholson's house. Makes you wonder.
Yeah, I mean, what it tells you is this reality is nothing. With regard to what most people believe it is. It's absolutely nowhere even close. And that's the thing. I mentioned in one of my presentations that the work that I do, Jay, I do it for me because like you, I want to understand the mechanics of how they go about doing what they do. Yep. I don't do this to convince anybody of anything. I really don't, because you can't convince people. If they're not ready, they're not ready. You can talk to you blue in the face. Nothing's going to happen. So you have to do it for yourself. And, but if by putting your information out there, you're able to interest a couple of people and it resonates with them, that's fantastic. But really, at the end of the day, I always tell my audience, it's an individual journey to learn what this is all about.
Yeah. And, you have to look at the right artist and figure out, what they're saying, because not all of them are as high up the pyramid as others. And so the right artist will tell you a lot more if you read between the lines. And people like David Bowie and even Prince were getting very close to saying things that were, troublesome to some people. And then they both kind of vanished.
Yeah. Got to be careful with what you say. That's why the Memoirs of Billy Shears is, in my opinion, a very, very important book.
I agree.
Because it is coming from a very high level person within the pyramid. And he's giving you insight into how this all works. And but unfortunately, most people are going to, they're going to hug the Cinderella story. They just want to believe that the fictional official narrative. They don't want to hear anything about how it really works.
It's fascinating. You see things that you want to see. You hear things that you want to hear, and even when you point it out to people, they still don't see it. And even then, and then you use backup evidence, and they still don't see it. So it's something that these guys know about human nature and human psychology, that you can actually reframe reality right in front of us, and we'll buy it. And they do it all the time. It's the more that I examine and drill down into events of the past, the more I realize, a lot of them just weren't real. They were not real at all. They were staged events. And now I'm not even going to get into it because I know what YouTube would do to me. But, just events that happened around my life, I went back and looked at, shootings and things. And I was like, wait a minute, none of this makes any sense. And so that's the world we live in. And I do believe you're right. I think the whole point is, well, I call it the great distortion. And William Casey, head of the CIA, once said that once everything that the people believe is a lie, we'll know that we succeeded.
Yes.
And you say to yourself, well, why would anyone build a world like that? Why would you want to live in a world like that? Because how irresponsible can you possibly be, right? But they use this chaos magic to hide themselves. That's what I've concluded. And the chaos magic is the great distortion. And it's like they have a list of distortions ready to pull out. As soon as the one distortion isn't working anymore, they bring out the next distortion until everybody is mentally ill, and that is rampant right now too.
Yeah, what I tell my audience is what you have to come to grips with is that this world is run by occultists.
Yep.
You have to understand that. It's not run by presidents. It's not run by prime ministers. That's just all puppet show stuff in front of the curtain.
Yep.
And once you understand that it is run based upon occultism, and the point you made before, Jay, about the controller's knowledge of the human mind and how to manipulate it goes way, way beyond what most people can even comprehend. They have been at this for a very, very long time. And in a show I did a number of years ago, I said to my guests, anything worth knowing is a lie. And what I meant by that is, if knowing the truth would help you in any way, would help you to understand this reality, it's going to be a lie. And right now, what they're doing is they're going down an alchemical process to change the world. And I also did a presentation on this as well. And right now we're going through a process. There's four stages of this alchemical process. So the first one is the Negredo stage. And that's the total destruction of the existing structures, belief systems, traditions, religions, and so on. Because from an occult perspective, from a magician's perspective, you cannot have remnants of the old. It all has to go away. You have to start with a clean slate and then build from there. And then you have the rise of the phoenix. So, this is what we're going
the
through
plot
right
behind 2001: A Space Odyssey, basically.
Yeah.
The monolith is the prima materia, the black stone.
Right.
It changes and revamps the human race 3 times in the movie. And the final one is, of course, the Star Child coming back. And Kubrick was clearly high up in those realms, and was probably, it was a pre-scripted movie that was scripted by them on purpose. I mean, I have the interview with the head of MGM at the time, and a guy says, well, what about that crazy science fiction movie you got being made in London? And he goes, I'm not following any of that. It's like, yeah, right, buddy. $10 million movie in 1968, and you're not following it?
Yeah.
Right? Because he didn't pay for it. So the whole thing is, and Kubrick must have been vastly aware of this Beatles thing, I think, too. So, we know the Who knew about it, because Pete Townsend says the parting on the left is a parting on the right. And that's exactly what happened, Paul.
You're talking about the hairline.
Yeah, the hair part to the right, which is the real telltale sign of who you're dealing with here. Right? They can't get rid of Help and Hard Day's Night, though. If we have any evidence that they're massaging those movies to make it more amorphous?
I don't know. I have to take a look. I actually have old versions of on VHS and stuff. I should go take a look. Now, they do doctor images on the internet all the time.
All the time.
This is what I tell people. People can't comprehend this. And I said, look, they control the internet, okay? So they can put up, take down, modify, whatever it is they want to do. And it's the same thing with documents, right? So some people will say to me, well, where's biological Paul's birth certificate? I'm like, we're dealing with deep state stuff.
Yeah.
Getting rid of a birth certificate is like a walk in the park. People still have this concept that this structure of law and order that you've been told exists, that it actually exists. Well, it exists for you, yes, but not for them. No. They have a whole different set of rules. There's a whole different reality. But they do a lot of doctoring, and I see it all the time. I see pictures of biological Paul McCartney where all of a sudden his chin's grown a little longer.
Yes.
His eyes have changed up a little bit. So they do it all the time.
Yeah, right before I watched the the rooftop concert that they did
Yeah.
at the end of Let It Be, or I think Let It Be. I can't
Yeah.
remember.
Let it be. Yeah. The Get Back
Yeah.
sessions.
Yeah, I knew it was coming on. I think it was YouTube or wherever, and I said, okay. As a film director, you're dealing with a guy who's about 6'4", where the original Paul was about 5'11", 6'3". What would you do? And I wrote down. I said, well, I would separate John and George. I would put Paul to the one side, and then I would shoot a camera straight up at him so that would reduce his the height that he had,
Right.
and then I turned it on, and it's exactly what they did. I was like, oh my god, it's exactly
Yeah,
how.
exactly. So in the old days, it used to be Paul and George at the same microphone
Yep.
and John to the side. And then with the Get Back sessions, the rooftop, they separated, they spread them all out. And they did exactly what you said, Jay.
Yep.
And also, when you watch the Get Back rooftop scene, take a look at how Billy plays bass. Notice his stance.
Yeah.
It's very, very different than how you see Biological Paul when he played going back into the early 1960s. Paul was much more animated. His bass is hopping up and down, and
Yeah, the original Paul never looked at his playing. He could just play without. But the Billy, he had to look.
He had to look.
And
in all fairness to Billy, the reason why he looks, I think there's two reasons. One is because he's naturally right-handed. So he had to teach himself how to play left-handed bass. And for those out there that think it's impossible, it's not impossible. There are Beatles tribute bands where the bassist is naturally right-handed, and they taught themselves to play left-handed. I think the Fab Four is one of those bands. The other reason why I think Billy looks to his left when he's playing is because he's blind in his right eye. Okay. So, right. So so when he's playing, he has to, he can't see out of his right eye. So he has to look this way in order to make sure he's where he's supposed to be on the fingerboard, on the fretboard. So that's something that, I determined once Sally came on and talked about the fact that he has a prosthetic eye. But again, going back to the first reason, he's naturally right-handed. So if he's going to play left-handed, there's going to be a natural tendency to look to make sure you're playing the notes and you're where you're supposed to be on the neck. Yeah,
and there's the famous film where he's at the Maharishi and he's playing six-string guitar, right-handed.
He intentionally flipped that. He did that intentionally in order to play with the whole Paul is Dead crew, right? The people out there looking for clues. He knew that was flipped. And he would do that once in a while. In Memoirs, he mentions that. He says, yeah, they'll put stuff out there like that just to kind of, to poke and put some more clues out there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what when I went down the rabbit hole in, I think, 2011, I just kept finding stuff had been switched and changed. And I was like, what's going on? And then I was reaching, I didn't have any evidence, but I was reaching the same conclusion that you've reached, that, somebody's really messing with this, and that the Beatles are a gigantic hoax. And the real question is, could you have a class action suit? I guess not, because it's the deep.
No. I mean, here's the thing, right? People have asked me that. And first of all, the court systems, where are you going to go? It's all owned by the very same people that are plugged into him. So that's not going to happen. Number two is he's operating under a corporate fiction. He's operating as Paul McCartney, the enterprise, Paul McCartney, the business, the corporation. Okay. So it's like if you own a business and somebody says, hey, are you the ABC company? And you go, yeah, I'm the ABC company. Well, are you really a building? No, but you could say you're the ABC because you own, that's your corporation. So when Billy says he's Paul McCartney, he's operating under a corporate fiction. And I can tell you right now, all the I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed contractually to make sure that thing's bulletproof.
Yep. I know you're right, because I know a screenwriter in Hollywood who wrote amazing screenplay about the whole thing, and he couldn't get, it was a really good screenplay and no one would do it. No one would touch it with a 10-foot pole. So
about the Beatles?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So he was going to dig into the conspiracy?
Yeah, oh
to
yeah,
reveal it?
the whole thing, yeah. And it was, you had fake people, fake names, right? But
Yeah.
it was clearly obvious who it was, right, and what was going on, and but no traction at all. Just like I know another screenwriter who wrote a screenplay called 1969: A Space Odyssey, going into the whole Kubrick stuff, and again, a really good screenplay, but no one will touch it, and so it's all being controlled from the very top, of course.
Oh
But
yeah. Yep.
yeah,
Well, the Beatles, the moon landing, all that stuff, that's very, very, very important
it all started at the same time.
to their narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so amazing. It's like somebody in 1961 went, hey, you know what? We can like change reality, right?
Yep.
And we'll get the best people, and and we'll do it that way. And I think that's exactly what's going on even to this day.
And they did. That's the thing. It goes back to what I was saying before. If we put 1960 as the stake in the ground, move
Yep.
forward 60 years, the amount of change that's taken place worldwide is monumental.
And let's not forget these occult groups were I have books, alchemical books, going back 400 years. They were using plants that had dimethyltryptamine in them. They were using mold off of rye, which is LSD, and they were using them in their rituals. I've got the rituals that they're using them, and I'm talking in like 1600 they were doing
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
So this group worked its way up into the power grid through Crowley, and then they spread their chaos, magic, hallucinogen religion. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to create a new religion to replace the old religions, all of them, I think.
Yeah.
Or those old religions have to start taking the hallucinogens.
Well, we could see, no, they want to replace the old religions. That's what I think. They just want to get rid of it because it's in their way. They can't have all these divergent belief systems as roadblocks to where they want to go. So the way to do it is to break it down. Just break it down. Get it to the point where it doesn't have the hold on people like it used to. Now, some people are never going to let go of it, but their plan is to move forward with a lot less people. I'll say it that way so that this doesn't get bounced up at YouTube. So there's going to be a process in place that
I brought the Georgia Guidestones to the world a long time ago, and we know all about that. And yeah, that's their plan. Their plan is to drive down and then have a more manageable population. But there's a lot of arguing right now among the elites that they actually need a big population. So or they can't go forward with they're trying to move into a type 2 civilization. That's their plan. We're going to type 3 or type 1, and they want us to move into a type 2, which is a high-tech, worldwide connected civilization where they manage everything through AI, and they want us to comply with it, and that's where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. But eventually, and I'm not talking about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, they think in terms of not just decades, but hundreds of years. So they might say centuries from now, this is our plan. This is where we plan to be. And this is unfathomable to most people. How do you think in terms of how do you plan and strategize centuries out? But, when you've got, when you have all of this stuff tied together with bloodlines and systems of education that we're never going to be privy to, that's how they keep it all together, and but I like to think, Jay, that we're giving them a little bit of of a run for their money. Shows like this and others out there that are trying to expose what's really going on. So all we can do
you're
is
right, because about 9 months ago I put out my film about the Zapruder film, and which was pretty radical view of the Zapruder film. And but I finally found a clear version of it so I could actually describe what was happening. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder what's going to happen now, right? You know, not that many people watching, maybe 6,000 people, something like that. Within 2 weeks, Oliver Stone was on Joe Rogan for, I think, 3 hours talking about his film, and because I really criticized his film in my expose. And then I said, okay, now we're going to head into the whatever year it is of the death, November 22nd, another occult day, by the way. Yep. And then, you know, even Tucker and everybody's going on about, oh, the CIA did it, the CIA did it. And I thought, well, that is amazing. They're doing a limited hangout right in front of me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little too much too late, Tucker. I saw that too.
Yeah, I thought so too. A little too late. But you know, we are making are having an effect, because I see the effect. And you've done really good scholarship. That's what I like about you. You're strictly business. You just take one step at a time, look at the facts, get it out there without any emotion, you know, because I mean, you know, you're going to piss off a lot of people who are Beatle fans, and again, I don't care, you know.
No, the truth is the truth.
Yeah,
and the truth has got to go out. I mean, to the best of your ability, that you're able to expose the truth. You're never going to nail everything, because there's always stuff that you're not going to know. There's pieces of the puzzle that are out there that have not been discovered yet. And the process is to discover these other pieces so you can continue to build the picture. And that's the position that I put myself in. I don't sit there and say, oh, I have the entire thing figured out, because tomorrow another piece of information can come your way, which means you're going to have to change up perhaps where you were the day before. So you have to stay fluid, because, like I said, the flow of information, there's always something that's going to roll up on your doorstep that you have to consider.
Yeah, and then you jog the memory of somebody, and then they contact you, and
you're right.
All sorts of, you know, different kinds of information. And the more that you get out, the more you have input coming in, and you know, I get clues every week or so about films and machinations inside films.
Yeah.
You know, stuff that probably make me sound like a mad person if I said it, you know, to anybody, but you know, it's definitely there. That's all I can say. There's definitely all sorts of stuff going on in showbiz that is, well, they're not hiding it anymore. The Grammys had a satanic performance the other night, so
no, they don't hide it at all anymore.
No, and it makes you, you know, makes you wonder if you know, there isn't some kind of satanic force. I mean, it really does. The more deeper you get into it, you know, you eschew it. You know, I'm trying to stay scientific. You know, I don't want to. But then you see things happening that are kind of baffling, as if, like you said, the long-term plan. Well, what kind of human? The only answer to the long-term plan is they really do have some kind of elixir of life, and they can live for a long, long time, which I've heard they do. Or two, it's alien or interdimensional that doesn't care about time. It has a plan. Its plan is to do whatever it's going to do, and it's doing it. I prefer the previous one than the other one, because, or they could be together. The long-lived person could be influenced by, especially if they're taking psychedelics, high doses of psychedelics. I'm used to be an advocate of that, but I no longer am, because I've seen the damage that they've caused. And so I do not advocate for taking large doses of psychedelics. I think it's a bad thing. I think it plays right into their hands, actually.
Yeah. Well, I think that's my personal opinion is I do believe that they are plugged into otherworldly, outside of our realm. And that's one of the points of continuity that keeps this thread going. So, and
yeah, I really do agree with that. I think that there's these ethereal presences and planes around the earth, and they have an investment in keeping the earth a certain way, and they view us as kind of like a nuisance, and they manifest here and they try to change our spiritual ways. Jacques Vallée talks about that in his books, about these interdimensional beings that change our religions, and there's a lot to it. There is.
There is a lot. In fact, at a previous show I did with a friend of mine, Billy Watson, I said that it's like a mind parasite or pathogen that commandeers the minds of so many people, especially those that are in power, because what's going on, how they think, the things that they do, it doesn't emanate from the human soul or the human spirit, Jay. So there's something alien to them, to the way they think, to the way they behave. That's my thought.
Oh, I think so, and I think that I think they walk among us, actually, and I think that it's just exactly what the Nag Hammadi and the Gnostic texts say. They're drawing all their energy off of us. We're like kept in in a hospital bed, just on life, preserve. Well, they draw all our energy off, but they don't want to kill us because they still need that energy. And so that's what the great distortion is. It's just keeping you in a stupor while your energy is being stolen from you.
Yeah, and a lot of that energy is the result of people living in fear.
Yep. I wanted to tell you, my wife actually went to go see the Beatles. I don't know when they went to Baltimore, 65, 66. And she was paid $5 to scream. She was probably cute as a button, 16 years old or whatever. And she was given $5, which was worth a lot of money in those days. And she screamed for the whole time. And then I was thinking, okay, that's a good gag and everything. But if the Beatles really were not that good musicians, it's possible that they were paying off these girls to scream, because she said she could not hear the music. It was so loud in there that all she could hear was a drum or something, but nothing. She could not hear the music. So it is possible they're paying those girls to scream just to cover up the bad musicianship.
Well, in Memoirs, it says that in the beginning, that's exactly what they did. They paid for the girls to scream and carry on. And then they knew that human behavior, that others would mirror that behavior and not get paid. They would do it for free. And that's what happened. So that's how they started, by having to set it up. And then they knew that the way humans behave, right, they would mimic.
The dance craze of medieval Europe. You know about that? Yeah.
What's that?
The dance craze of medieval Europe.
No, tell me about it.
Okay, so it was reported all over Europe. It would usually start out with a woman, and she would go to the center of town, and she'd do this kind of punk rock, jerky dance, and then pretty soon another woman would show. It was always women, and pretty soon it'd be 15 women doing it. Then men would start joining in, and the whole town would be doing this, imitating this woman, and still to this day we can't explain it, but
Jay, you mentioned something that I wanted to ask you a question about. In fact, as a film person, what I have said, that you said your wife went to the concert, she couldn't hear anything because it was so loud, people were screaming and so on. Yet when we get these videos of the Beatles playing in 1964, 65, playing live, we get sound that's very articulated. There's a differentiation between the guitars, George's guitar, John's guitar, the bass, and so on, the vocals. And as a musician, my argument was, well, back in the day, they only had two-track recorders. That's number one. And to play in those types of settings, and many times the vocals were going through the PA systems, especially when they were in baseball stadiums like Shea Stadium in New York, that to get that type of recording is impossible. So what they did, and actually I was told this by a friend of mine who was a professional sound engineer. He's been in the business for decades. This is Mike. All of this post-production takes place afterward. So all this work goes to get the audio all cleaned up. They'll put a completely different track to the performance and so on. And then it's married. And then I'm oversimplifying this, folks, by the way. Okay, I'm just telling you how this goes. And then it's sent out for public consumption. And that's the other thing that people don't understand, that there's this whole post-production piece of this thing. There's this machine behind the entertainment, right?
Absolutely. Oh yeah, definitely that they overdubbed the Shea Stadium stuff and everything. There's no way, you know.
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
watched the documentary on Shea Stadium. Watch how it's cut. You can't really watch them playing very long. It's a quick cut, quick cut, quick cut. You're
Yes.
like, I want to watch Ringo drum, but I can't get to see it very much because, and that's done on purpose too. So
yeah, that reminds me of footage of them playing in 1966 in Japan at Budokan. And I picked this up. I was watching the concert, and they're doing Day Tripper. And the song starts, and either John or George are playing the riff, but the song is playing. Okay, and there's another part in that exact concert where George is playing the song "If I Needed Someone," and he's playing his guitar, and then he waves to somebody, and the guitar is still strumming along. And
I'll be danged.
yeah. So I was.
So they had the music pre-recorded like ELO did, and
Well, it was either a backing track, or back in the day, I had another person come forth. I know, said that there are backstage, offstage musicians that the audience cannot see who are playing the music. Maybe at some points, not all of it, but at key times, they're doing whatever they need to do to make sure it sounds right. So it might be the complete song, it might be a part of the song or whatever. So take a look at that footage, folks, if you have a chance. Go to, you can see it on the internet. Look up Day Tripper 1966 in Budokan and watch John and George, both of them. They are not playing the riff, but you're hearing it. So how did that happen?
Yeah, there's all sorts of other clues. The drum kit in Magical Mystery Tour, the Three Beatles.
Yeah, Three Beatles.
And I mean, they're clearly not trying to hide it that much. And I don't know. Manipulation everywhere.
Everywhere.
Hey, Mike, I really appreciate you coming on. You're a wealth of knowledge. I'll watch all of your videos. I tell everybody, watch his videos. You'll love it.
Thank you, Jay.
Especially the 4-hour Beatles one, because I mean, you really ace it for them not being able to have the talent to write their music or the age to have enough experiences. I mean, you have to live to be a certain age before you can be a good writer. And, a lot of people that are young go force experiences on themselves so they can write, but they still were too young, 21, 22. I don't know.
Yeah, and you have to understand the background of the deep state. You have to understand the Committee of 300, of Tavistock, Stanford Research Institute. You have to understand who Theodore Adorno was, Willis Harman, and I cover all that. And then once you understand who these players are, then the pieces to the puzzle come together a lot easier, I think.
That's right, and there are not that many players.
No.
If you make a list of them, you're not going to hit over 200 players that are obviously the members of this thing, and there's like a culture brigade, and they own all the studios, and they run the whole thing. That's what happens.
Yeah,
things handed down from, it's not as overt. It's more like, why don't you do some films on a certain subject? Right? They suggest it, right? Then all of a sudden you see all these films coming out that address a certain mind control subject that they want you to do. And that's how they do it. So it's never overt. That's the thing. They keep it the other way.
right.
All right. Mike Williams, you are a wealth of knowledge. Sage of Quay, sageofquay.com. Check out his YouTube. It's really good. Oh, I want to add, Mark Stacer is not John Lennon, right?
No.
Okay. I apologize.
He's completely different ears.
Huh?
He has completely different ears.
Yeah, I saw your video, and I foolishly said he was about 2 years ago.
There's times when he looks very much like him, but look at Mark's ears.
Yeah.
Very, very different than John's ears.
Yeah, and then lastly, before we leave, so really, ironically, Paul is the only. I mean, Billy is the only of the three original Beatles. They're all gone, and they kind of all left early.
Yeah, well, Ringo's still here, and Pete Best is still here. Yeah, he's still alive, right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, Ringo.
But Billy has commandeered the show. Let's just put it that way. Billy has put himself in a position where he is the Beatles.
Yep. And now he's in control of the narrative.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on.
All right, Jay. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay, everybody. I'm Jay Weidner, Reality Check, hit like, subscribe, and all that other stuff. And I'm going to have Mike back because there's is amazing subject. Thanks, Mike. And we are out of here.